A unique study out today asked hundreds of Canadians about foreign policy issues and then had them discuss those issues in groups and with experts. One of its findings was a strong desire for Canada to be consistent on human rights at home and in our advocacy abroad. It also provided other insights that could help guide decision makers. Anne McLellan is the former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister and also served as Federal Minister of Health. Lisa Raitt is the former Conservative Party Deputy Leader, and they co-chaired the group of former parliamentarians and public servants advising the initiative, and they're here to fill us in on what they found. Thanks to you both for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great pleasure.
Lisa Raitt, I'd start with you if I can. What do you think is the big takeaway and finding from the work that this group has done?
Well, I think the first thing is it's a wonderful tool to get Canadians to talk to one another and deliberate on issues that they may not normally get to deliberate on. And I think the second part is that the result of the deliberations is that they spoke to each other respectfully, and where they disagreed, they still came away with respect for one another. And to me, as we roll into Canada Day, I think that's pretty heartening to see as a commentary on who we are as individuals.
So, Anne McLellan, the tone of this was certainly positive. What about the content of the findings and the conclusions you can draw from this exercise?
I actually think the conclusions are pretty positive, too. First of all, around the process, it's quite clear if you give people objective information, put them in the right setting, they will talk to each other, they will engage each other, and opinions do change, which I think is a really refreshing thing when you look at perhaps the polarization we see in the United States. But if you look at the conclusions, I think not necessarily a lot of surprises, but, for example, one thing that struck me was how strongly Canadians feel about the protection of the Arctic, our sovereignty in the Arctic, and the economic and physical well-being of the people who live in the Arctic. Another interesting finding, very, very high support numbers, was around Canadian companies, David, and companies doing business offshore, and the expectation that they live up to the same environmental, health, and safety standards wherever they do business as they're expected to here at home. So I think there's lots of really good, meaty stuff that Canadians and, dare I say, political parties and policymakers can take away.
Yeah, Lisa Raitt, was there one or two conclusions like Ms. McLellan just went through that stuck out to you in this?
Yeah, for sure. On oil and gas, David, what really stuck out to me was there was an agreement that while we are transitioning in our way away from fossil fuels, the reality is that the majority of folks agreed that industry was going to have to be involved in this transition, that they should be involved, these companies should be involved. So that was an interesting takeaway, considering this is one of the more politically charged topics out there. And I think the second one, which isn't necessarily in the findings, but was discussed by the partners, is that even though it may not have been a topic, the issue of Indigenous peoples, Indigenous issues in this country was brought up organically by the people taking part in the deliberations of their own volition. They may have been talking about providing safe drinking water in other countries, but they did attach it back to obligations and responsibilities here in Canada to our First Nations.
Yeah, Ms. McLellan, that's an interesting thing, the connection of Canadian values at home and abroad, and linking the conduct and the baseline of what should be expected no matter where you're operating in whatever part of the world.
Exactly. Canadians, as it was said this morning, Canadians don't want flag waving abroad. What they want is consistency, consistent action at home and abroad, so that therefore Canadians should not go offshore and say, we would like you to do this, or we would like you to stop doing this, if in fact we're not actually living those values and taking real concrete action here at home.
Lisa Raitt, we're talking about this like it's a poll, right? But this is not a tradition. This is more of a supercharged focus group in some way, right? Like people were brought together, they were allowed to debate, they were given access to experts and information, and then I guess their opinions were assessed before and after. Can you just walk me through how this worked?
Well, you got it right there in a nutshell,
good.
David. Very well done. So basically, there was a group, a sample of 444 Canadians chosen. They were polled ahead of time for their understanding and beliefs on these certain topics. Then they were provided, as Anne pointed out, unbiased material. They were given access to experts to ask questions. And then they were placed into groups where they could debate amongst themselves. And this was 8 to 12 hours of time that these folks spent on this. So we're very grateful to the Canadians who took part in this exercise. They would be able to debate amongst themselves, but the moderator wasn't somebody like Anne or I. It was artificial intelligence, and they were self-moderated in that sense. And the moderator would be able to determine if things were becoming too heated and intervene if they needed to. And we understand from those who ran the operation that really Canadians didn't really tussle over any of these topics. It was very civilized in the way that they discussed. And the other takeaway, and then they did the poll afterwards to see whether or not any of people's opinions have moved. But one interesting take for me was that what was a big takeaway was that Canadians, after disagreeing possibly vehemently with each other within these groups, still had and in fact gained respect for one another.
Well, that doesn't sound like politics at all. I mean, no, I'm just kidding. But, you know, and Ms. McLellan, I don't want to take this question to be seen as sort of diminishing or discrediting this, but, you know, it's not sort of like representative sample polling, right? Where you have like 1,000 people and a margin of error and like this interaction with experts and getting information. So, I mean, can you draw sort of broad, large-scale conclusions from this because of the distinct way this was done compared to sort of your more standard sort of random sampling polling?
Well, certainly the people at Stanford who created the platform and run these deliberative democracy exercises would say, yes, you can take this to the bank, so to speak. That in fact, Jim Fishkin, who ran this for us out of Stanford this morning, described this as a national controlled experiment. We had a control group. We had the 444 people who actually went through the deliberative exercise. And I think if Mr. Fishkin were here, he would say this is very much a scientific deliberation / experiment, and that one can, in fact, take these results with a high degree of confidence in terms of their real and legitimate representation of the Canadian public.
So Lisa Raitt, just a final thought on that. Given the strength of this process, would you recommend this being used by governments to get a sense to guide decisions?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the tools that we had as policymakers was to do roundtables, but invariably these roundtables were people were left to their own devices and getting information provided to them, and the moderator may have had one point of view or another. I mean, Anne was very clear this morning when she said, when you go to consultations, don't expect you're going to get the result that you think you're going to be getting. You have to be open to it. And I think this process gives you the best chance of getting an unbiased view of what Canadians are thinking after having been informed. And one other thing, Canadians are engaged in foreign policy. They have opinions on it. They're willing to express it. And I think we've got a lot to be proud of in our country for the uptake on these issues that we don't necessarily think the average Canadian's thinking about.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, but we're out of time. But I want to thank you both for coming on. Anne McLellan, Lisa Raitt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.